and welcome to the 2022 Data4Good Awards interview series. I'm Kate Carruthers from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, and it is my honour to introduce Richard Jefferson, who is the Executive Director at Lens.org. Lens.org was recognised for their exemplary use of data in the award category of Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure. And we're just going to have a bit of a Q&A with Richard. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kate.
So can you tell us a bit about your company's passion around leveraging data for the betterment of society, Richard?
Be delighted to. In fact, it's intrinsic to the very type of company. It's a not-for-profit social enterprise, which is basically self-sustaining from revenue, which is an unusual combination. Our passion is about treating data as the critical element of decisions. My view is that all aspects of data should be about increasing the quality, timeliness, and inclusiveness of decision-making. We are scientists who recognize that science is a critical part of all of innovation and all of modern society, and this includes social sciences, but that very often the guild structure of professionalism in science and the very specialized way the data feeds down within that guild makes it extremely difficult, sometimes impossible, to integrate that with all of the other actors in society that need to be coordinated to produce an outcome, such as a change in practice or a change in products. So our job for the last 22 years since we founded the Lens has been to take the largest corpus of non-copyrighted data that's about innovation, which is the global patent system, merged with everything that is known publicly about open data in the research community, that's scholarly communications, and meld it into a decision-forming tool with a very strong user experience. So that's what we do, and we do it basically because we sense that the urgency of the crisis we're in right now is a reflection of how poorly we do innovation, how exclusively we do innovation, and how we tend to forget that the we that does innovation is a tiny part of the we that should be doing innovation.
That's really interesting and such an amazing achievement to have been in existence for such a long time too.
It feels even longer sometimes.
And can you delve into, it was industry, innovation and infrastructure. Can you talk a bit more about your work in this category of how do you do it?
Well, first of all, we have a very substantial and extraordinarily experienced engineering team. Many entities, many companies will have discrete business analysts that will look and try to parse and understand the scope of the data and the data sets that they must work with to provide guidance to engineers. Our engineers actually subsume a lot of that responsibility themselves. They've been with us a very long time. Our core team has been together almost 12, 13 years, which, as you know, in software engineering it's like in dog years. It's really a very long time to be with an organization, but they know intrinsically and feel passionately about innovation knowledge and innovation data. For instance, we've ingested virtually all of the world's patents, almost all of them in full text form, extracted complex metadata that links them to other influential knowledge corpora, such as the research publications, and built that in such a way that industries can discover scholars or researchers within academia that would be excellent partners. Funding agencies such as departments of energy or health or what have you that have specific mandates can then find which researchers are themselves influencing industry or could be. So trying to break the barriers down between the different guilds within the innovation system is first and foremost our driver. Now, the other component of that, Kate, is that the majority of the world's problems are really the purview of the majority of the world's people, and yet we still only empower a small fraction of the people and institutions in the world to be active workers in innovation. So a key part of our job is to ensure absolute global access to this knowledge. There is no gatekeeping, there is no surveillance. Our intent is that everyone on Earth shall have access to every bit of our data at no cost for free. And the tools that we provide to institutions such as companies or universities or government agencies, we ask them to defray the costs of our doing that by licensing the tools based on their proportional ability to pay. So institutions in the global south, what used to be called the developing world, will have access to these tools at no cost or very little cost, whereas larger corporations that can readily afford to subsidize this global platform do so.
That's a really great equitable approach. I love it. So what are your plans for the future? What are you going to do next? Or just
Scale. Well, the biggest passion we have is that anyone doing the same thing now that they did 10 years ago is living in la la land. Basically, the earth is boiling, our societies are crumbling, our ecosystems are in horrific disarray. We cannot assume that what we did 10 years ago will work for the next 10 years. We have to make a step change in the quality, quantity, and pace of problem solving. So we use the term, even as scientists, we dismiss that science is the center of this equation. It's just a part of it. So we use the term STEPS, S-T-E-P-S, for science and technology enabled problem solving. That enablement is, in many cases, simply enriching the quality of the decisions that people and institutions can make. So we view that the climate crisis is not just something to work on, it's something to cause us all to completely change what we do in our lives. So our job is to make it easier and faster for more entities to do a better job at what they do. So I would say that our future is that we must scale, and very, very rapidly. But as you know, in information technology, scaling doesn't have to be linear. You can get a huge, huge scaling for a very, very modest input of resources. So we don't have to be 5,000 people to be able to influence 5 billion. So we must scale. We must take our licensing to the next level, get investors in. And what's exciting to me is that there is now a trend in investment to see that social impact is worthy as a rationale for investment. And when that in turn lends itself to a self-sustaining enterprise, then that doubles down on the value proposition. So we're exactly in a time right now when visionary investors can come in and work with us towards becoming not only a scaled and impactful institution, but one that brings in more kinds of data. You'll appreciate working in data policy and strategy with the university, that how legislation, policy, and civil society adopt the outputs of research is really critical. But that data is very hard to munge. It is not well structured with its metadata. So it's going to take some effort to ingest legislative and policy and regulatory data and make it linkable to those bodies of knowledge that informed it and the people and institutions that guide it. So that's part of our next challenge, is to bring in new types of data that encourage social embedding of our work product.
I was literally at a conference talking about research and how we manage research data for the rest of this week. And it's such a huge issue. So it's really good to hear that you're tackling it. I suppose the other thing, if you're managing all of this data, how are you approaching data governance and data stewardship? Is that part of the DNA of your organization?
Very much. In fact, I think more than just data stewardship is privacy maintenance. Our view is that the single biggest battleground in society is privacy. I am deeply dismayed at how society has been convinced that knowledge is free when in fact it's not, because the user is the product. And this is, of course, commonplace with Google and many other service providers, and many that are just e-commerce providers, where basically the use of it on the single individual level doesn't seem so invasive. But in the global level of social integration and social function, it's horrific. So we go well out of our way to ensure that there are no tracking tools, no devices, no pixelating, no any aspect that would invade the privacy of our users. But this is particularly important because we recognize that almost all of the changes that must be made in the next 10 to 15 years in our dealing with the climate crisis will be from institutions. And virtually every institution, even universities, but certainly companies, lives in a world of competition and confidentiality. We must make sure that every user of our system has complete confidence that their norms, their practice norms, can be respected. So while we are passionately driven with open data, we make a very careful distinction that while our data is open, all of the users of that data are in control of what they do with it. And this is part of the governance element. The users determine what the disposition of their work product will be. If they add value by combining dozens of patents and scholarly works and annotating them and building what we call a landscape around a particular domain, let's say solar energy, they can choose what they do with that. Do they want to provide that to their investors, their clients, their customers? It's their business to do so. Open data is incredibly powerful at keeping choice in the hands of the user. It doesn't say, like the old GPL did, it doesn't say, if you use this, you have to give everything back. We recognize that businesses can't work that way. But we do say, if you use this, okay, we don't reach through and demand you change how you do business, because no one will do that.
Yeah, it's so hard to get researchers to change their ways. So what are your views on what's going to happen in the world of data governance and its impact on society over the next little while?
I think that a lot of the governance element is determined by, I know this sounds a little strange to data mavens, but by the user experience, because ultimately data is all about decisions. Data is nothing. It can be a giant scourge of data, but somebody somewhere, some institution somewhere, even algorithmically, must make decisions based on that to create value. So we focus on that side of the data, not the massive ebbs and flows of bits, but rather the engagement with users who will be empowered to focus on what it does. Now, we've been in the business of, for instance, global patent and scholarly search for a very, very long time. We were the world's first open patent search facility 22 years ago, founded with some funding from the Rockefeller Foundation and other philanthropy. But one of the things we discovered early on is it's all about the user experience. The user experience determines the data governance in a strange and interesting way, because how users approach decision-making based on the data determines what we do with the data and the provenance of the data and how we share that provenance with the user, which we always do. So part of our technical approach to this, Kate, is that we've developed a strategy we call the meta record strategy. As you can appreciate as an academic, a single scholarly work in a journal, let's say Nature, may actually have half a dozen or more instantiations out in the real world. You will have an abstract only on one database. You'll have the full text behind a paywall, perhaps. On another database, you'll have a different one in which there has been value added by taking R.A. Jefferson, my name on the paper, into Richard Anthony Jefferson, my name on my birth certificate. And
increasingly data sets are part of this picture.
Absolutely, they sure are. But one of the challenges for any institution that's very ambitious is not to get off mission. So the issue of data sets between research scientists, for instance, is very much not what we're trying to do. There are others who do that very, very well indeed. But there's been a trend to talk about open science. And I remember a brilliant physics professor of mine back at University of California when I was young, saying that you should actually examine a hypothesis at its limit cases and ask if it solves the problem. If it does, go on with it and test it further. But if it doesn't, throw it away and move on. And the idea of open science, like we'll all share all of our data, in many ways, while it's laudable, is not dramatically different than how science has progressed since the Enlightenment, which is, while it's slow and it goes in fits and starts, it's all based on sharing of observations, ultimately data, and building it. It's slow, it's cumbersome, and it's not as good as it could be by a mile. But the question is, if it were, would that help get products and services that changes the climate response we have? And my assertion, our institutional assertion, is no, not really. So we don't focus on that. We focus on the idea of coordinating the actors, making it possible for all the different actors to find their interests, to find opportunities, to make impacts, to decrease the risks for investors, to plot out a trajectory towards an outcome. And more importantly, maybe most importantly, to identify the partnerships that need to be formed, say from UNSW and a particular company, Microsoft or whoever, to find areas of overlap and areas of complementarity. So our focus is not so much on bulk research data exchange. It's not that at all. In fact, as I say, there are plenty of initiatives that do that and do that well. Ours is of identifying the silos, building transparency between the silos, between corporate data, between institutional data, between funding and policy data, and between civil society, and all of that, to make it possible for the coordination to happen. Because we think that's the point of intervention that's required, is coordinating the actors.
And it's such a valuable perspective. Is there any other thing that you want to tell us about your Data4Good Award achievement?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank CDO Magazine and the EDM Council for recognizing us. It's really, in many ways, very humbling, because professionals in data science, to recognize something that is, in some ways, an aggregation of knowledge artifacts, which is a type of metadata. So it's an aggregation of metadata over data. Many people do think of data as massive bit streams and Excel spreadsheets and what have you, but it's wonderful that the organization recognizes that ultimately data in service of decisions is what it's about. So this was very welcome for us to hear from data professionals who live and breathe the back end of the world these days, to recognize that without that interface with institutions, without that interface with human beings, we lose our guide. We lose any ethical grounding that we have, or any imperative as biological entities to innovate. So I would encourage those who are in the world of data to stop, take a deep breath, and ask about the user experience. Is it ready for the data? Or is it going to be something like a smear of Vegemite on top of a big giant data set? It will never work that way. We have to think of the users first.
They are very wise words to end on. Thank you so much, Richard Jefferson. Congratulations to you and your team at lens.org. And folks, please visit cdomagazine.tech to see the additional interviews. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kate. I appreciate the interview.